This is the story of Frank Bourassa, a man recognized by law enforcement as the first and foremost validated authority in the counterfeiting world today. A Canadian hustler from Trois-Rivières, Quebec, who achieved a feat so early hustles and the arbitrageur model. Frank's criminal career began early, establishing a pattern that would later define his massive counterfeiting operation, acting as an arbitrageur or middleman. Stolen goods racket. As early as high school, Bourassa noticed other students were stealing clothes from stores. He saw an opportunity to connect the dots. He approached the shoplifters and arranged to buy the stolen goods from them, then resold the clothes to his own clients. He soon began taking pre-order type thing lists from clients, essentially turning the fencing operation into an efficient business. He continued this racket for a couple of years and realized quickly that he was making more money than my parents were. This early activity caused him to be kicked out of high school around age 15, leading him to move out of his parents' home. Stolen car parts. His early hustles expanded to include fencing stolen car parts such as mags, tires, stereos, and spoilers. This early career foreshadowed his ability to efficiently broker and manage illicit goods at scale. Legitimate business and the rise of the workaholic. After leaving school, Frank sought legitimate work. Around age 15 or 16, he learned to fix cars from a friend. He enjoyed this work because it offered food for brain and presented a lot to learn. He worked as a mechanic for a few years. At age 21, he felt capable of owning his own venture, realizing the only difference between him and his boss was that the boss was writing the check. He bought his first business, a gas station with an attached garage. He later sold this to start his own factory manufacturing brake parts for cars. This complex manufacturing business checked all the boxes for challenging him and expanding his skill set. While running the factory, Frank became intensely committed, working as a workaholic. He was known to work 20 hours a day, not because he felt tired, but because he enjoyed the work, finding it very real and dynamic and rewarding. The return to crime. The marijuana trade. During the period he ran his factory, Frank again applied his middleman model to the illegal marijuana trade. He connected with friends who were growing and exporting the product, offering to buy and resell the supply. This venture was initially hugely successful and very lucrative. However, the risks began to increase as prices dropped from $4,000 per pound to about $1,100 to $1,200, and the penalties grew stiffer. This venture ended in 2006 when police busted one of his associates, which led the authorities back to Frank. He was arrested on drug charges and was incarcerated for 3 months or served 3 months on house arrest. Burnout, recovery, and the epiphany. The extreme work ethic that characterized Frank's life ultimately led to a severe physical and mental crash. He woke up one morning dripping in sweat, shaking like a leaf, and was in bad shape. Doctors determined he had severely drained his body, running 0 vitamin this and 0 that. The horrific feeling made him worry about going insane. Frank sold the brake factory and resolved to figure out what was wrong, tackling his panic attacks with the same obsessive research he applied to crime and business. The recovery process wasn't quick. He spent the next 2 or 3 years traveling through Europe, Asia, and Africa with his girlfriend. While traveling, he visited World War II battlefields, demonstrating his interest in complex, high-stakes history. Upon returning home, Frank resolved never to be poor again. He sought a new path, looking for something that offered a high payoff, but was not the heavy stuff like machine guns or smuggling cocaine, which he felt was just totally not my world. The idea for counterfeiting, the ultimate expression of his bold intellect and risk appetite, came to him suddenly in 2008. While stopped at a red light, he had a moment where everything, all the fog, cleared up. He realized that since everyone works to translate effort into money, he would skip a whole bunch of those steps and go directly to money. He saw this idea as the ultimate shortcut.
The audacity of Bourassa's final crime was foreshadowed by his immediate commitment to achieving perfection and accepting maximum risk. He knew that counterfeiting would be immensely difficult because authorities like the Secret Service were created specifically to prevent it. He immediately rejected low-quality fakes made by inkjet or laser printers, calling them high-risk, low-reward. He understood that good counterfeit bills would be 100 times harder to make than bad ones, but anything less than perfection would lead to being caught easily. This decision required a massive upfront commitment. Years of research. Frank committed years of intense research. He started by using public computers in internet cafes to avoid tracking. Ironically, he relied heavily on US government websites like the Secret Service and the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, moneyfactory.gov, to learn the details of US banknote security features, the paper recipe, and the printing process. He described this research as treating the problem like rocket science, going for invisibility. He chose the US $20 bill because it was widely accepted globally and, crucially, because it offered invisibility. People would scrutinize more a 50 than a 20, but nobody looks twice at a 20 because it's just what we use. Maximum financial risk. He invested $320,000 to $325,000 Canadian dollars, roughly £189,000 into his operation. Every penny I had left, gambling his liberty and all his capital on the scheme's success. He knew that getting caught meant he would lose everything. His plan was built on the premise that he must be dead on in replicating the currency, from the paper's chemical composition and thickness to the specific security features like color-shifting ink and watermarks. This commitment to massive upfront investment and meticulous technical detail made the printing of $250 million unavoidable, as the custom paper order had a minimum quantity equivalent to that sum. Frank went so big that the enormous cash of $200 million he later hid would ultimately serve as the necessary leverage to secure his freedom.
Frank Bourassa's master plan to produce $250 million in perfect counterfeit US $20 bills required meticulous technical planning, years of committed research, and a sophisticated approach to industrial-scale crime that he likened to rocket science. He leveraged public information, exploited international supply chains, and employed counter-surveillance worthy of espionage to construct an operation that successfully fooled federal authorities. 1. The research phase, cracking the currency code. Bourassa immediately resolved to pursue perfect counterfeit notes, recognizing that anything less would be high risk, low reward, and involve low-level street hustles. He committed years to research, knowing that creating high-quality bills was 100 times harder than making poor ones. Selecting the target. His determination to figure things out was the engine of his operation. The currency, he selected the US dollar because it is universally accepted everywhere on the planet, making distribution ideal. He noted that US currency is actually the easiest of them all to counterfeit because it is not printed on polymer like many other global currencies. The denomination. Bourassa chose the $20 bill. This was the sweet spot because it offered invisibility. People scrutinize more a 50 than a 20, and nobody looks twice at a 20 because it's just what we use. Utilizing government resources. Bourassa started his research using public computers in internet cafes to prevent location tracking. Ironically, his most valuable tools were the official US government websites, which provided detailed specifications. The US Secret Service website was often the first search result he hit, detailing what banknotes are about and explaining security features. The Secret Service, initially founded in 1865 to stop counterfeiting, became a critical source of information. The U.S. Treasury Department's Bureau of Engraving and Printing website, moneyfactory.gov, detailed the entire printing process, from engraved printing plates to finishing steps. This meticulous, grinding research work allowed him to compile an exact recipe, including the chemical properties and thickness requirements which he needed to defeat accounting machines and detection pens.
The cost of setting up this operation was immense. $320,000 to $325,000 Canadian, which was every penny I had left. Bourassa was gambling his liberty and all his capital on the scheme's success. The paper challenge. The paper was the single most difficult feature to reproduce and determined the note's essential crisp feel. The required composition was a blend of roughly 75% cotton and 25% linen. Since he could not call the legal US supplier, Crane & Company, he targeted mills far away, in Europe or Asia. The cover story. He created a fake company, an investment firm, and used aliases. He told paper mills he was printing specialized high-security bond certificates. His rationale was that foreign suppliers were less likely to be familiar with US currency specifics. The custom order. He fed the paper requirements slowly, one by one, to avoid suspicion. He eventually found a specialized firm, possibly in Germany or Switzerland, that would accept the custom batch. The minimum quantity mandated by the mill meant he had to order enough paper to print the entire $250 million. Watermark drum. The watermark of Andrew Jackson needed to be molded into the paper while in pulp state. Frank outsourced the creation of the specific cylindrical printing drum for $15,000 to a company, possibly in Germany or Poland. He relied on the supplier not recognizing Andrew Jackson's face. Security strip deception. The security strip needed to say USA 20. To avoid tipping off the mill, Frank first asked for the strip to say USA 30s and 40s bonds, only making the final adjustment to 20 at the very last second, leveraging the rapport he had built. Acquiring the industrial equipment. To handle the scale of $250 million, which weighed over 27,557 pounds, Frank needed a massive setup. The press. He required an industrial offset printing press. He hired an expert, a former press operator, to inspect 14 used presses before buying a used Heidelberg 4-color offset printing press. This press weighs approximately 40,000 pounds. The shop. He built a full-fledged print shop inside a rented farm building or garage near Trois-Rivières, chosen for its discretion. No windows, no signs. Finishing equipment. He purchased industrial cutters, slicers, bundling and counting machines. He also needed multiple metal printing plates, 8 total, for the front and back sides, and different colors, which he perfected in Photoshop and outsourced for etching. He sourced color-shifting ink and other security features from suppliers, including those in China. The paper arrived in 12 pallets via cargo ship at the port of Montreal. Frank treated this moment as extremely high risk, assuming surveillance was already on the materials. Counter-surveillance and delivery. The roadblock, Frank implemented an elaborate plan involving runners. One runner drove the delivery truck, while another followed in a car and deliberately stalled the vehicle in a one-lane highway bottleneck for 15 to 20 minutes to block any trailing police or surveillance cars. The electronic sweep. The truck was taken to a parking lot and left for 3 days under surveillance to detect electronic bugs or trackers. Once satisfied, the paper was moved to a new truck on new pallets. Frank was so confident he drove the final truck to the print shop himself. The grind of production. The printing process took 5 months of non-stop effort, working approximately 10 to 12 hours every night, dark to daybreak for invisibility. Frank described the operation as literally grinding factory work. The massive industrial presses would spew up money of sheet in a second. The work involved constant feeding of paper, monitoring the 4-color lineup to avoid flaws that would render the sheets just trash, precise cutting of pallets after pallets, adding serial numbers, and counting and strapping the bundled stacks. The counting machines often jammed, adding to the manual labor. To manage internal risk, Frank relied on a 3-tier system, minimizing the information any one person knew about the full scale of the scheme or the location of the main stash. Testing and confidence. Frank printed the entire $250 million before selling the first bill, knowing that selling instantly triggered the risk of investigation. His quality of the notes was his ultimate security measure. The bills had to pass basic security hurdles. They defeated counterfeit detection markers, which Frank dismissed as entry-level thing that you need to overcome. The bills worked successfully in accounting machines and ATMs. Frank maintained that his notes were so accurate that they were virtually undetectable by the naked eye. He claimed that even when shuffling new fakes among real brand-new bills, he couldn't tell which was which. He believed the only way authorities could distinguish them was through deep lab analysis of the paper's chemical structure. The high quality of the bills was an essential element of his success.
Frank Bourassa's dedication to creating the perfect counterfeit US $20 bill was a massive gamble, requiring years of research and a startup cost of approximately $320,000 to $325,000 Canadian dollars. Having printed the enormous, nearly undetectable fortune, the challenge shifted from production, which was literally grinding factory work, to distribution, which carried the immediate risk of arrest. The immense scale of the stash. Bourassa's operation, eventually recognized by a Guinness World Record for the largest counterfeiting operation by a single individual, resulted in the production of $250 million in forged notes. This total amounted to 12.5 million counterfeit $20 bills. The sheer volume was staggering. The $250 million stash weighed an unbelievable 27,557 pounds, or 12,500 kilos, or multiple metric tons of cash. The printing itself took 5 months of constant night work. The finished currency was stacked in boxes piled on pallets within his print shop, located in a rented farm building outside Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Bourassa printed everything before he sold the first bill, knowing that the moment a single note entered circulation, an investigation could begin immediately. The distribution strategy: going invisible and overseas. Frank's strategy was designed for absolute invisibility. He avoided printing 50s and 100s because people will scrutinize more those bills. The $20 bill was the preferred denomination because nobody looks twice at a 20, because it's just what we use. His sales model focused entirely on volume and distance. Target clientele. Bourassa tapped into his existing criminal network, primarily targeting drug traffickers. His associates were heavy people doing heavy stuff who were reliable and respected in their line of illegal work. The price point. Frank sold the counterfeit notes at 30% of their face value. This means that for every $1 million in fake cash, he received $300,000 in real currency. If he had successfully sold the entire $250 million run, he stood to pocket $75 million in real money, or 75 million US dollars, or 58.2 million pounds. To protect himself and his operation from law enforcement, he insisted the bills be pushed far away, specifically targeting criminal groups involved in import-export, so the cash would end up in Europe, Asia, and Africa. This ensured the bills would not flood the domestic Canadian or US markets immediately. Bourassa encountered an unexpected obstacle. His professional criminal contacts were frightened of the counterfeit money. Drug exporters, who dealt in heavy goods and high stakes, considered counterfeiting scary stuff because the penalties were often much stiffer than drug dealing, equating it to the same level as murder and kidnapping. To overcome this wariness, Bourassa needed to prove the bills were perfect. Free samples. Frank gave out free samples, small stacks of maybe $2,000, totaling about $1 million in samples, to his direct contacts. The buyers were urged to test every bit of the cash to confirm it was perfect. The perfection. The notes were of such high quality that they would defeat common detection methods, like the detection marker pens, entry-level thing that you need to overcome. The bills had to pass through accounting machines and ATMs to be considered successful. Frank stated that when new, the notes were identical to real ones and could only be told apart by deep chemical analysis of the paper. Small transactions. To minimize risk, Frank avoided large transactions, keeping sales down to no more than $1 million or $300,000 at one time. He explained that a runner sent to collect $5 million might be tempted to steal it, but smaller amounts reduced the incentive for betrayal. The initial flood and the takedown. The distribution process, while meticulous, was going a little slower than Frank anticipated, primarily due to the difficulty in finding clients willing to handle the currency. Financial success. Despite the slow pace, Frank recouped his initial investment and saw profit. He claims he made approximately $15 million in real cash from his sales before his arrest. Sales volume. Before authorities closed in, Frank had managed to sell around $50 million, or 50M pounds 39 million, of the counterfeit notes. The bills appear. The highly sophisticated bills began showing up across the United States. The first fake $20 bill to be discovered by authorities was recorded in Troy, Michigan in 2010. They were subsequently found across various states, including California, Nevada, Florida, and the Northeast. The notes were so convincing that RCMP investigators described them as not detectable by the naked eye and barely detectable. The infiltration. Frank was caught in 2012 after he decided to add a fifth client to accelerate distribution. This new client, a gang trafficking stolen construction equipment run by a man named Eric, was already infiltrated by an undercover Royal Canadian Mounted Police Officer, or RCMP. The arrest. On May 23, 2012, authorities, including the RCMP and the US Secret Service, raided his girlfriend's home after tracking him. They seized about $949,000 to $1 million in fake money found in his safe and printing equipment.
When Frank was arrested, authorities believed they had seized the entire operation. However, because Frank had printed $250 million and only sold approximately $50 million, there was a massive hidden stash of around $200 million in fake currency still unaccounted for. Frank successfully used the location of this hidden $200 million stash and the printing press as a strategic bargaining chip to negotiate his freedom, resulting in the Crown dropping all counterfeiting charges and his release after only 6 weeks in jail. Even after the deal, a significant amount remains missing. Frank printed $250 million, but only $200 million was recovered by the authorities after the deal, leaving between $49 million and $50 million unaccounted for. When directly asked where the missing funds are, Frank offers only a wry smile. Maybe I sold it all. Maybe I didn't.
This enormous, missing sum of virtually undetectable counterfeit cash, which Frank says is likely still in circulation, stands as the unbelievable legacy of his operation. During interrogation, Frank was initially silent. However, the authorities used his girlfriend as leverage, stating that because the fake money was found in the house registered under her name, she's in on it. We can charge her. To protect his girlfriend, Frank confessed, admitting he was the printer and that she was innocent. He knew he was literally hanging yourself. Since the currency was US dollars, the US Secret Service intended to extradite him to the United States. Bourassa was informed he was facing up to 60 years in federal prison in the US, 20 years for each of the 3 counts: fabrication, possession, and distribution of counterfeit money. Frank was jailed without bail. The bargaining chip and negotiation. Frank's lawyer immediately worked to prevent the extradition, arguing that the Canadian search warrant was unlawful. The key point was the moment Frank reversed into the tarp garage, causing the police helicopter to lose visual. Because authorities could not prove they had eyes on the counterfeit money 100% of the time, the court agreed and the extradition was suspended. After serving 6 weeks in jail, Frank was released on a bond of 10,000 Canadian dollars. He still had to answer to the Canadian Crown for the charges of fabrication, possession, and distribution of counterfeit money. Leveraging the hidden stash. Frank knew the authorities believed they had dismantled the whole operation, but he had printed $250 million. Since he had only sold about $50 million, there was a massive hidden cache of approximately $200 million in fake currency still out there. Only Frank and one close associate knew its location. Frank decided to use this enormous, undetectable fortune as his final bargaining chip, his ace. He calculated that because he went big, printing $250 million, the risk of $200 million in perfect fake bills flooding the market was so severe that the authorities would have to deal with him. He correctly guessed that if he had only printed a smaller amount, like $10 million, authorities might have ignored the threat. Minutes before his trial in December 2013, Frank revealed the stash to his lawyer. His lawyer successfully negotiated a deal with the Crown. Frank would walk free with time served if he revealed the location of the $200 million stash and the Heidelberg printing press. The Crown agreed, desperate to get the large volume of virtually undetectable counterfeit currency off the street. The drop-off and light sentence. The authorities set the drop-off date a month later, January 31st, 2014. Frank suspected they were trying to catch him moving the money before that date, so they could void the deal and reinstate the counterfeiting charges. Frank had already hidden the money and the press in a box truck parked at a hotel parking lot in Trois-Rivières, where it had been sitting for months. On the drop day, Frank retrieved the key, hidden behind a tree, and led a police convoy, which included a K9 unit, a bomb squad, and people in hazmat suits, due to fears of a booby trap or explosion, to the box truck. In a bizarre twist, police were so worried about the truck exploding that they asked Frank to drive the vehicle, loaded with the $200 million in the printing press, himself to the RCMP headquarters. Frank drove the truck alone, surrounded by a police convoy and helicopters. In exchange for the money and the press, the Crown dropped all counterfeiting charges. Bourassa was ultimately charged with minor offenses, such as a drug-related charge found in his seized car, resulting in a fine of $1,350 to $1,500 Canadian dollars, approximately $1,100 to $1,200 US dollars at the time. The total time Frank spent incarcerated for the greatest counterfeiting operation in the history was 6 weeks. The fact that he was allowed to walk free after producing such high-quality counterfeits is considered a major embarrassment by US law enforcement.